Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No,
Yeah,
I can't.
you can?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the
All right.
law and I decide.
Well,
so I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
This is scary, isn't it? That woman is who Biden wants to sit on our Supreme Court justice. And she can't even define something that a kid knows. See? So, the sermon today is not about memorial. That was last week. But it is about war. Specifically, the culture war. It's one that is spiritual in nature. It's one that boils down to attack on the family. Even the racial issues that we see all are largely related to an attack on the family. And though these things may seem to be a recent development, it has been a strategy of the devil since the beginning. And I believe that the Bible can give us some insight into it. Because the devil knows that if he can distort through creation order, then society will collapse. Let me lead us in a quick word of prayer. Lord, I pray that we would be good stewards of the children that you have set before us, that we would honor you as men and women of God, to glorify you in the way that we were created, that we may be a witness to the world and be an example to them. In your name I pray. Amen.
Can you provide a definition?
To where? Over here? Oh, this way?
You turn it off. There you go. I'll just put, well, you want to go back, press up.
Okay. So at first I would like to start with manhood. So in the garden, God gave Adam a mission. It says, then God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to cultivate it and tend to it. The Lord commanded the man, saying, from the tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For on that day you shall eat of it, you shall surely die. So Adam's first mission was to work, was to cultivate the earth. Proverbs tells us that we rule by working. Men like to fix things, right? They like to build things. They like to take raw material and turn it into something useful. They like to tame animals for transport, for yard work. Is these things that we do in order to take on the nature of our Creator, to take on the creation God's work in creation on those 6 days. Because God is not the God of confusion. And destruction and oppression are the marks of the devil. Having a mission gives men a purpose. But Proverbs tells us that the strength of a young man is his glory. Strength given appropriately, right, to work and to work hard. It gives him an outlet for that competitive nature, that aggression that our culture considers toxic. Proverbs also says that wisdom is strength. And it is the combination of these two things that allows men to put their energy towards godly things, not just to do things because they're hard and to look macho. Ecclesiastes tells us that we should rejoice in our work because when God rested, he said it was good. And Jesus tells us that he's working even today. The Bible has much to say on work. Work was good before the fall, and I believe that will be good in the resurrection. Proverbs tells us that a man must first work, and then he can build his house. And you will start to see this relationship between building, ruling. In fact, the word dominion comes from the word dem, which means household. And to further understand manhood, we must look at the other charge that God gave Adam. The first law, not to eat of the fruit, the only law. And this tells me that God tells men that they must be keepers of the law, that we are responsible for shepherding the home, that we are to know the word, to teach it, to share it, to rightly divide the word of truth. See, parents have a great influence on their child's life. It's the first face that they see. Well, it might be the doctor, but you get the point. So it's not the pasture, it's not the school, it's not social media. It begins in the home. And I believe it's very essential that every man learns how to be a leader. Because every man needs to be their brother's keeper. Every man can be a discipler. Most will be fathers. And we're all spiritual parents to somebody. So this next piece might be kind of disheartening. But to that I just say, put on a Band-Aid and get back in the fight. So we've turned to 1 Timothy, and it says, "He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the household of God?" So you see here this idea of responsibility, not just responsibility and behavior, but responsibility for somebody else. So you're saying that if my child sins, I'm responsible for that? That is what it's saying. You're not guilty of it, but you are responsible. Remember, parents are the most influential in their child's life. This idea of responsibility is not exclusive to the Bible. Consider a Navy captain that runs his ship aground. Even though he's not the one steering the ship, guess who's going to have to answer for that? Or consider an employee that cusses out a customer. who's the one that's going to have to make rectifications? Or a simpler example, a child that breaks the neighbor's window. The child's not going to be paying for it, at least not immediately. So let's continue with this idea of responsibility. So in Romans it says, For by the offense of the one, death reigned through the one, and much more with those who receive the abundance of grace of the gift of righteousness reign in through life through the one, Jesus Christ. So if you accept that Jesus was responsible for our justification, you must also accept that Adam was responsible for our condemnation. See, Jesus was not guilty of our sin, but he took on the responsibility. He took the death that we should have died, the punishment that we should have received, and he took it on the cross. But what does Adam do? Let's return to Genesis. It says, the man said, the woman whom you gave me to be with me, she gave me some of the fruit of the tree, and I ate. So we see two failures here. The first one was that Adam listened to his wife. So that's not to say that you can't listen to your wife, but men must practice prudence, right? Remember, you're responsible for what happens. And God warns him in verse 17. He says, Then Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. With hard labor you shall eat from it all the days of your life. And this is where we see work become hard. So Jesus does what Adam should have done. He steps in between the bride and the snake. And then he turns to God and says, I will take her punishment. I will take her penalty. And even though we can't die for anyone's sins, we can intercede for them, like Job does for his children in Job 1:5. We can be that guard on the door, filtering every man, form of entertainment, ideology that would threaten our home. Because I assure you, the greatest wolf in sheep's clothing, the greatest deception, is not the bad pastor that wants all your money. It's not the bad contemporary Christian music that sounds like love songs. But it's being a product of our time and then reading that into the Word of God. That is the worst form of eisegesis. But what about taking the fight to them? I mean, after all, that's how you claim territory, right? You go on the offensive. We expect our pastors to only be on guard, to only protect the sheep. But the apostles in Acts 5:42, even after being beaten by the Sanhedrin, they went out into town and they kept preaching every day after day after day. And James tells us that if we resist the devil, he must flee. I mean, that's a clear battle plan, right? We go into his territory, we resist, and he must flee. If you notice, I had named this sermon Taking Point. So the point man is the first squad member to enter a room that needs to be cleared. He also has the greatest chance of being blown up or shot down. But it is in his sacrifice that he knows that there will be others after him to complete the mission. And I believe this is the mind of sacrifice that we need for for men to follow after Christ. Jesus himself laid down his life for his friends. 1 John 3:16 says, "By this love, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers and sisters." Paul said he considered his life worthless for the task that God has given him. And we look to marriage, right? The man lays down his life for the wife, because marriage is meant to be a mirror of Jesus to the church. The devil knows that if he flips the creation order, that he can ruin society. He took the form of an animal. He tempted Eve. Eve listened to the created being instead of God. Adam denies responsibility for it. You see, real men are a dying breed. The godly man, rarer still. And our society has given men every reason not to grow up and be responsible. You want to stay around and play video games all day? Go ahead. Want to go out to nightclubs and enjoy yourself? Go ahead. You want to sleep around? There's plenty of contraceptives for that. Even if she gets pregnant, you can have abortion. If she doesn't want an abortion, she can go on welfare. And even now, a man can just put on a wig and a dress and not even claim to be a man anymore. But Timothy tells us that a man that does not provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever. Worse. Having children should mean taking that responsibility. And this is indeed a heavy burden. I believe this is why James tells us that not many of us should be teachers. But men were never meant to bear this alone. So let's return to the garden. So it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. He blessed them. God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over a living thing that moves on the earth.'" So you see this mission that God gave Adam was now meant to be shared, to rule together, to fill the earth as one team, one flesh. But the role of the woman should be different from the man, right? If it was merely about reproduction, you don't need two genders for that. And Genesis is a bit silent on what Eve did in the garden, so let's look to Proverbs instead. So in Proverbs 14:1, it says that the wise woman builds her house, but the foolish woman tears it down. So what does this building look like? What does her home base look like? And as I go through these things, notice the parallel between the home and the church. So if you take the Hebrew word to build and you turn it into imbaneh, it means to obtain children. And if you take the Greek word and you turn that to build and you turn it into oikoidomen, it means edification, specifically to the building of others. And if we look at the woman in Proverbs 31, what do you see? You see her crafting, dealing in real estate, farming, trading, using all her skills to improve the home. She's not restricted to it. It's not her prison, but it is her dominion. She prioritizes it. And no one expects women to have all these different traits, all these different skills. But just like the church, where everyone has a spiritual gift, God calls everyone to use their unique abilities for his glory. Because she has just as much of a stake in the home as the man does. Her husband trusts in her because she's good. She brings him goodness. She's confident. She's skilled. So he delegates to her. He ensures that she's respected. Her praise is from her family, not from Facebook. She builds up her reputation through hard work. Consider Ruth, who was just being obedient. She was well known in the town just for her hard work. You think in that moment that she realized the impact that she would have down the line? She was being faithful in the little things. The home should be a place of fellowship, where the table is the center. It should be a place of warmth, a place where the world looks in and it envies and it sees, look how happy they are. It should be a place of hospitality, where we trade our comfort to give someone else comfort. A place where we display the fruits of the Spirit. The word kindness shares the same root with the word kin. Basically, it means to treat others like family. The home should be a place of learning, where the older teach the younger, where children learn to fear God, where great learners become great teachers, a place of peace, because wisdom opens our eyes to the things that God is doing. It should be a place of ministering to the poor, to the stranger. It should be an evangelistic hub where men and women play to their strengths because God created them differently. It should be a place of rest. The Hebrew word rakam for compassion shares the same root for the word womb. The Bible describes women as a tree of life, a fruitful vine. And God in Isaiah, he says, he will comfort his people like a mother. So I want you to look at this next slide. So the name Eve, or Isha, it has the root word fire, or ish. And women can be quite fiery, can't they? In looks and attitude. See, fire brings warmth. It gives you a source of energy. It can forge metal. It can harden clay. Or it can burn you and turn your house into ashes. And if you give it fuel, it spreads. We look out in the world and we see these changes, women becoming discontent. After 6,000 years of history, human history, all of a sudden, the patriarchy has become toxic. So what changed? Let's return to the garden. So Genesis 3:16, it says, "To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you shall deliver your children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Now most translations will follow that top translation, and the Hebrew supports it. But the ESV offers an alternative. It says, "To the woman he said, I shall surely multiply your pain in childbearing, and in pain you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. And John Piper offers support for this, because this Hebrew word only appears 2 other times in the Old Testament. One in the Song of Solomon, the other when God is addressing Cain and warning him that sin seeks to master over you. But perhaps instead we should look at the woman of Proverbs 9:13, the loud woman, or the defiant woman in Proverbs 7:11, or maybe the quarrelsome woman in Proverbs 19:13, or 21:9, or 21:19, or 27:15. You see, women have refused to relegate themselves to lieutenant anymore. But rank is not a matter of capability, but appointment. Trust me, I know. They seek to usurp the captain without realizing that the burden, the accountability that is required of it. The chain of command is there for a reason. It offers protection. It's there so that you don't have to submit to anyone outside of the chain of command. It offers an intermediary in case somebody in the chain of command is out of whack. In our case, the elders to the husband. Every relationship has a form of submission. The citizens to its government, the employee to the employer, the students to the teacher. Even in LGBTQ relationships, someone always has to play the submissive role. The only exception I find is in friendship, but friendship doesn't have a task or a mission that has to be accomplished. So respect is not optional. Respect is a commandment. But there is also beauty in submission. Christ, who being co-equal with God, did not count it robbery to submit to him. Jesus even tells us that the greatest among us will be a servant. Submission has an effect on unbelievers. Consider Abigail, who saved her husband, even though his name literally means fool, and even stopped David from taking vengeance for himself. It is no longer honorable to be a wife and a mother in our society. They would rather prioritize their career, believing that having children closes one door, not realizing that there are other doors that will be open to them. You not prioritize your career and also be a wife and a mother. Even they would have to admit that there's a trade-off. The other option is to marry a coward and make him stay home with the children. But the problem is, you can love a coward, but you can't respect him. And you're certainly not going to follow him into war. But perhaps we should take a survey. Ladies, whether it be your husband, father, brother, son, raise your hand if you want them to step down. No takers? Raise your hand if you want them to step up. I believe the worst temptation for women is idleness. Idle hands is not just an adage. In idleness, women lose their purpose. They lose the purpose that the potter had made for them. You see the women in the Victorian and the 50s eras become reduced to trophy wives. In the ease of technology, it robs them of skills. Not to say that we should return to the Stone Age, but there was lack of guidance for taking these new skills and applying it to the home. Because women like to take raw materials and turn it into something useful as well. In our era, where the trade craft and the business are no longer centered around the home, we had to adapt. And women found themselves flipping back, choosing between either the subduing or the filling role. And if they only go for the filling role, then they're subject to exploitation. But if they go for the subduing role, then they are one step from trying to be a man. So is it any wonder that we're in this transgender movement? I mean, biology has become the only barrier left. And that's a problem I find with ideas like egalitarianism. Not to say that women aren't equal with men in value, because they are, but because it doesn't recognize the uniqueness that the Creator has given to men and women. The Catholic convent shares much things with feminism. It told women that you can only find glory outside of the home, that mothering is not a high calling. So is it any wonder that we beat the humanness in growth by birth rate alone? And if these things seem too political or too inappropriate, then I have to tell you that we are in a war, and that we do our kids a disservice not to teach them how to fight it, because they are the next generation. You think that the enemy fights fair? I mean, their propaganda is in our social media, our entertainment, in our education system. It's in Disney. Right? Disney of all things. The Bible does not approach sin in a Veggietale fashion. It does not cover sin, it exposes it. And seeing the world in a militaristic lens is not fanatical. Psalms 144:1 says, "The Lord prepares my hands for war." Paul tells us in Ephesians 6 to put on the armor of God. 2 Timothy 2:3 tells us that we should be pleasing our commanding officer. Revelation 6:2 tells us that Jesus one day come conquering to conquer. See, if you look at the world as if we're still in the exile from the garden, it starts to make sense. It starts to put the suffering that we had to endure in a better picture. Because everything in war is a struggle. Because the world is never fair. But we look to a heavenly home. God told the Jews in exile something very similar to what he told Adam and Eve in the garden. To build gardens, to build homes, to have families, to increase so that you may not decrease. Good. A child's mission is simple. Listen, my son, to your father's instructions, and do not ignore your mother's teaching. Children need a safe space to learn and obey. Not to be completely sheltered off into the world, but to have a bunker to observe the world and see it implode on itself. But how can they? If they see dad as an incompetent buffoon, as depicted in every modern sitcom, or if they see mom disrespecting dad, and she pushes him away, they might grow to resent her. Proverbs 22:6 tells us to train up a child in the way that they should go. But this could work both ways, couldn't it? For good or for bad. It also says that they wear these teachings like a headpiece or a pendant. And if a child learns that the only way to make it in this world is to lie, cheat, and steal, so if a child does not respect their parents, do you think they're going to respect the police, the law, or even God? Is it any wonder that in the Old Testament, dishonoring your parents was a death penalty? You see, the church is indeed a building, but it's a building made with blocks of family. And if any of these blocks are out of place, then the walls are not strong. Jesus warned us in Luke 17 not to make our children stumble. They need good examples to follow. And you might see what's going out in the world as a sign of the end times, but I see it as the world just returning to paganism. Mothers, instead of sacrificing their kids on the altar of Moloch, they're sacrificing it on the altar of freedom or choice. Pumping their kids full of hormones, turning them into eunuchs. See, mankind is rebelling against God as it always has been. And those same people that accuse God of being hateful are acting just like the Canaanites that he wiped out. But there is hope. There is opportunity for the church. So you might be able to convince a couple of boys to put on a dress and play nice, but by and large, they're mostly resistant to it, because that is the nature that the Creator gave them. Is it any wonder that people like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson have such a big following? Young women may find it harder to have such role models. But where darkness grows, the light shines brighter. But that's where we can come in. After the dust has settled and the battle is over, we can go out there. We can pick up the pieces. There are young men and women out there that don't know how to be young, godly men and women. Because that's what God does for us. He comes into the chaos of our world. He picks up the pieces, and he rebuilds. Let's rebuild, church.